The mill smelled like wet cedar and rust. That was the first thing Mason Reed noticed when he stepped onto the warped dock. Not swamp water. Not decay. Old wood. Worked wood. The smell of a place that had spent decades cutting trees into something useful. And according to his stepmother, that was supposed to be funny. 3 weeks earlier, after the lawyer finished reading the will, she sat in his father's chair holding coffee with both hands and smiled without looking at him. "You got the mill," she said. Then came the pause. The one meant to hurt. The swamp mill. She almost laughed. Congratulations. The house stayed with her. The truck stayed with her. Most of the land rights transferred through complicated legal arrangements Mason barely understood. At 19 years old, after losing his father and then effectively losing his home, all he received was a failing sawmill hidden deep in marshland nobody had used in years. At least according to her. Now Mason stood at the edge of the property while morning fog drifted across black water around him. The old mill sat raised on timber supports above swamp channels and marsh grass. Weathered boards covered the walls beneath rusted roofing. Wooden walkways crossed dark water toward loading platforms and storage structures disappearing into fog. Beautiful, quiet, forgotten, and somehow, the place still stood, stubbornly, like it had decided years ago that collapsing required permission. Mason tightened the straps on his backpack and started across the walkway. Wood creaked beneath his boots. Water moved softly below. Bird calls echoed somewhere deeper in the trees. The farther he walked, the stranger the place felt. Not abandoned. Maintained. The rail tracks leading toward the loading area looked cleaner than expected. The support beams beneath the structure showed repairs made within the last several years. Even sections of the dock had newer boards installed. His father had definitely been here recently. Frequently. Mason stopped in front of the massive entrance doors. The faded sign overhead barely remained visible. Reed Timber Mill. Most letters had disappeared beneath weather and age. He pushed the doors open carefully. The hinges groaned loudly. Warm air drifted outward. Cedar. Machine oil. Dust. Not decay. Preservation. Immediately his pulse quickened. Inside, the mill looked enormous. Massive saw systems sat frozen beneath overhead beams, while conveyor tracks crossed the interior towards storage platforms and loading bays. Workbenches lined the walls beneath organized tools and equipment. Stacks of timber sat arranged carefully beneath tarps. Dust covered everything lightly, not heavily, like someone planned to return eventually. Mason walked slowly deeper inside. "This wasn't dead to you," he whispered, because suddenly his father made more sense. The long weekends disappearing into the marsh. The excuses. The vague answers whenever Mason asked questions. The family always assumed he loved restoring old equipment. Now Mason wasn't so sure. Then he noticed the tracks. Fresh scrape marks crossed the floor near the rear section of the mill. Heavy parallel grooves. Recent movement. His heartbeat quickened. What moved? The tracks disappeared beneath a massive wood storage rack bolted against the wall. At first glance it looked permanent. Then Mason saw the steel rails underneath. Rails. Industrial rails. No chance. He searched nearby until he found the mechanism hidden beneath hanging chains and equipment hooks. A heavy iron wheel built into one support beam. Slowly, he turned it. Deep machinery rumbled beneath the mill immediately. Mason jumped backward. The storage rack shifted sideways several feet across hidden rails. Cold air rose upward from below. Industrial lights flickered weakly somewhere beneath the floorboards. His mouth opened slightly. No way. A massive freight platform sat hidden beneath the mill. Not a cellar. Not storage. Something much larger. Mason stepped onto it carefully. A control switch remained attached beside the railing. Lower facility. His pulse pounded harder. He flipped the switch. The platform descended slowly beneath the mill. Darkness surrounded him briefly before industrial lights activated deeper below. Then reinforced concrete walls emerged. Steel beams. Catwalks. Workstations. The deeper he descended, the larger everything became. And when the platform reached the lower level, Mason stopped breathing for a second. The underground structure stretched beneath the swamp like a hidden engineering facility. Prototype transport systems sat beneath suspended lighting rigs. Fabrication stations lined entire sections of polished concrete floors. Drafting tables overflowed with blueprints and mechanical designs. Nothing looked abandoned. Everything looked preserved. Operational. "What is this?" He stepped slowly forward. Because this wasn't a sawmill. Not really. Not at all. Then he noticed the files. Large binders lined shelves beside the nearest workstation. Transport systems. Patent records. Licensing agreements. Royalty summaries. His pulse immediately jumped. No, absolutely not. He opened the nearest file carefully. Engineering diagrams filled the pages. Terrain mobility systems. Heavy load transport stabilizers. Swamp and marsh navigation technologies. Then came the contracts. Utility companies. Infrastructure operations. Emergency services. Transport manufacturers. And beneath everything, current royalty records. Current. Not historical. Current. Mason stared. His father hadn't been hiding inside an abandoned mill repairing saw equipment. He had been building something. Quietly. Successfully. And apparently nobody knew. Or nobody cared enough to look. Then he noticed the framed photograph. His father stood smiling beside several engineers inside this exact underground facility. Below the picture, handwritten words read, "Let them think it's only wood." Mason slowly looked around the underground structure again. All those years, everyone mocked the worthless swamp mill. Meanwhile, an entire engineering operation existed beneath it. Then he noticed the envelope waiting beside the drafting table. Mason, his father's handwriting. His pulse pounded harder now, because suddenly, he understood something important. The hidden platform wasn't the real secret. It was only the entrance. Mason stood motionless beside the drafting table while the quiet hum of hidden machinery echoed through the underground facility. For several seconds, he simply stared at the envelope. His father's handwriting looked exactly the same. Strong, neat, deliberate. Suddenly the last few weeks felt strange. Because 3 weeks earlier he thought his life had ended. His father was gone. His home wasn't really his anymore. And his stepmother made sure he understood that every single day. But standing beneath the swamp mill, nothing made sense anymore. Slowly, Mason picked up the envelope. Inside sat a handwritten letter, several key cards, and a thick packet of documents held together with metal clips. His father's handwriting covered the first page. If you're reading this, then you found the lower facility. Mason sat slowly at the drafting table. Good. Most people stop looking once they think they understand something. That's usually where they miss everything important. His eyes moved slowly around the hidden engineering complex again. Prototype systems. Fabrication equipment. Blueprints. Nothing about this place matched what he thought he knew about his father. The letter continued. The sawmill above protected the operation below because people ignore old industries. They think old things become useless. That mistake gave me privacy. Mason looked around again. And suddenly, everything started making sense. The family saw a failing swamp mill. They saw expensive repairs, rotting wood, isolation. Nobody saw value. Attached beneath the letter sat ownership summaries and licensing documents. Mason unfolded them carefully. The hidden operation specialized in terrain mobility systems and transport technologies designed specifically for environments ordinary equipment struggled to navigate. Swamps, flood zones, remote terrain, disaster environments. Instead of building a public company, his father licensed systems quietly. Long-term agreements, partial ownership, steady income, low visibility. Mason stared at the royalty records. The payments were active, current, reliable, not ridiculous billionaire money. Better, industries still depended on these systems. The type of income that quietly survived changing economies and trends. Then one sentence stopped him completely. I left this to you because you always cared about how things worked. His throat tightened. Because memories came back immediately. When he was younger, he followed his father everywhere. Repairing chains, fixing engines, building things. He always wanted to know why something worked, not just whether it did. Everyone else eventually got bored. His father never did. Apparently, he remembered. Mason opened the rest of the packet. Maps, testing chambers, storage sections, research levels, and one location stood marked carefully in red. Primary Design Archive. His pulse quickened immediately. There was more. Of course there was. He used one of the access cards and followed the map deeper beneath the facility. Steel hallways extended beneath the swamp itself, while reinforced walls disappeared into darkness. Eventually he reached another massive security door. The keycard unlocked it instantly. The room beyond looked less like part of a workshop and more like a private research center. Climate-controlled storage units lined the walls. Engineering models sat beneath glass displays. Blueprints covered drafting tables. Suspension systems and transport prototypes rested beneath suspended lights. And at the center, a massive terrain model stretched across an entire platform. Mason walked toward it slowly. The model showed flood zones, mountain regions, forests, marsh systems, and infrastructure routes interconnected by transportation systems. His father hadn't built vehicles. Not really. He built systems. Integrated systems. Emergency access routes. Disaster mobility platforms. Remote transport solutions. He opened additional files carefully. Utility companies. Rescue operations. Infrastructure organizations. Flood response contractors. Many still use systems originally developed beneath the mill. And somehow, nobody knew. No. He corrected himself immediately. Nobody cared enough to understand. That realization stayed with him over the following months. Because rebuilding his life afterward wasn't dramatic. It was an overnight success. It became responsibility, learning, paperwork. Attorneys reviewed ownership structures. Patent specialists verified licensing agreements. Manufacturers immediately requested meetings after ownership transferred officially. At first, nobody took him seriously. A 19-year-old inheriting a hidden engineering operation beneath a swamp sawmill sounded ridiculous. Then they reviewed the documentation. Everything checked out. Every patent remained active. Every licensing agreement remained legitimate. Several contracts even required renegotiation because his father deliberately preferred stability over aggressive growth. Then came the offers. Huge offers. Transportation companies wanted complete ownership. Investment firms wanted controlling stakes. Manufacturers wanted acquisition rights. Enough money to solve every problem in Mason's life instantly. A year earlier, he would have accepted. Without hesitation. Most people probably would. But his father anticipated that too. Inside the archive room sat another handwritten note attached beside the main drafting board. Never trade ownership for temporary comfort, unless survival gives you no alternative. Mason stared at that sentence for a long time. Because suddenly he understood what his father actually built. Not money. Control. Stability. A future. So Mason didn't sell. Instead, he learned. Engineering systems. Licensing structures. Business management. The hidden operation still maintained relationships with several trusted people his father worked with for years. A retired systems engineer named Daniel explained the mobility platforms. A fabrication specialist taught Mason how prototype systems functioned. An accountant walked him through the licensing network tied to the patents. Slowly, the underground facility came alive again. Quietly, exactly as his father intended. The sawmill above changed too. Roof repairs, structural reinforcement, updated electrical systems. But Mason intentionally preserved the appearance. From outside the swamp pathways, it still looked like an old, forgotten timber mill. That invisibility protected what existed underneath. Inside, though, prototype testing resumed. Transport contractors returned. Long-term partnerships renewed. Word spread quietly throughout specialized industries that read terrain systems had become operational again. Months later, Mason received an unexpected phone call. His stepmother. He almost ignored it. Almost. But eventually he answered. Her voice sounded different. Less certain. Less confident. I heard things are going well, she said carefully. Mason leaned back inside the workshop office, overlooking the hidden facility below. Machines hummed beneath him. Engineers moved between fabrication stations. Something like that. Silence. Then, I didn't know. Mason looked through the glass, toward the underground operation, toward everything hidden beneath the old mill. He thought about the day she left. The day she pushed him out. The day she called the mill worthless. Finally, he said quietly, "You never looked." Another silence. Longer this time. Then she said goodbye. That was it. No argument. No dramatic confrontation. Because there wasn't anything left to say. One autumn evening nearly a year after inheriting the mill, Mason stood outside on the wooden dock watching sunset reflect across dark swamp water. Warm light glowed from the mill windows behind him, while hidden machinery hummed beneath the surface below. His phone buzzed with another acquisition offer. He silenced it, then looked back toward the old sawmill. Everyone thought the inheritance was worthless because they only saw the surface. Wood, rust, water, age. Most people stop asking questions once appearances support what they already believe.